you go through life and you win games, and through winning some games, you get to understand different cheat codes, and the cheat codes level you up insanely.
Timothy Armoo started his company at the age of 14. Then, in 2012, at just 17 years old, Timo decided to start a business newsletter.
11 months afterwards, sold it for 110 grand, right? And I was like, oh my God, this is insane.
Which ended up with him meeting people like Richard Branson.
Gave me several of those moments in such a short space of time in that I was like, oh my God, now my life has changed.
Imagine what comes next.
Business success is a good game that I want to play.
At just 21 years old, Timo launched Fanbytes with clients like Nike, Samsung,
and then the government actually came to us and said, right, we want you to help.
Over the next 5 years, it grew from an idea in his bedroom to employing over
75 people.
Then last year, it was acquired for an 8-figure sum, somewhere in the region between 20 and 50 million pounds.
I was just like, oh my God, this is more money than I'll ever need in my entire life.
Now, Timo speaks around the world, in New York, Dubai, and Beijing, sharing some of his best entrepreneurial tips.
Someone makes a bunch of money, then says money doesn't make you happy. It's like, all right, mate.
He is still only 28 and is becoming a flag bearer for Generation Z.
My mum was just on benefits.
This is Timo's story from top to bottom. And as you'll hear, he truly started from the bottom.
Like, grew up on like the Oak Kent Road, 4th floor council estate. I was like, yo, I need to get out of this.
Timo, welcome to Jimmy's Jobs of the Future.
What's up? It was good.
It's so good to have you here. And we were talking just beforehand. It's been a year since you kind of made the big exit from Fanbytes. What have you learned in that year about life?
Wow. Okay. Just going straight into it. About life.
Just ask the big questions.
Not even about business, just life.
Yeah.
So we got acquired last year, 3rd of May. I was 27 then. And I think I didn't have a long-term perspective on life. I was just like, oh my God, this is more money than I'll ever need in my entire life. I cannot believe this is my life. And that was kind of like where it ended for me. I was like, okay. And then afterwards, I started thinking, right, and now what? You know? So there's this very weird thing that happens after you get some kind of liquidity. It's like shortly afterwards, you're kind of like, wow, this is incredible. And then maybe 3 months afterwards, you go, oh, wait, the world hasn't changed.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, well, people are just going along with life. I remember actually talking to my friend who said he also, sold his company for like hundreds of millions. And the next day he went to Tesco and he was just like, why hasn't the world, like, why is there not a choir out here saying like, oh my God, you're so amazing? So there was that kind of cognitive dissonance there. And then probably the second thing was like, I realized the conditions that brought me fulfillment were actually working with really smart people. So it wasn't actually the thing I was doing. It was like the people that I was doing it with, which was quite different to when I started Fanbytes, at 21. I was like, oh, actually, I enjoy this particular idea. I enjoy this particular thing. And I didn't understand that actually the people were quite a big factor of that. So I think like those two big revelations of like, it's very important that you see life as not ending. There's so much more things to do. There's so many more interesting things. And actually the choice of the people that you choose to do things with rather than what you choose to do is a lot more important.
So is the next requirement for what you do to work with interesting people more than anything else?
Yeah. So I think the people is the biggest thing. What Fanbytes was, like social media, influencer business, we kind of like stumbled into it because it was the world that we grew up in, right? So, I started it in my second year of university because I was like, oh, well, I get this YouTube thing and I get this influencer thing. Other people don't get it. Therefore, let me just kind of explore the general idea. I didn't really consider, the team of people I would choose to do it with. And now I think for any, subsequent thing, I'm like, oh, actually, thinking about who to do it with and the type of team is a lot more important than what the product is, because a good group of smart people can figure out whether a bad idea is bad.
Yep.
And then they can figure out where the good idea is,
And talk us through what Fanbytes was, because you've got this great Twitter thread that kind of at the top of your page at the moment, which is pinned on kind of like the 8 things you learned.
Yeah.
And like one of them is where you talk about the evolution of Fanbytes going from 4 figures to 5 figures to 6 figures. And, you started out at those kind of like, small, just connecting the influencers and brands. But talk us through how it evolved.
Yeah. So we started off and so Fanbytes, I founded it because I thought, well, people don't understand this whole influencer world. And I, as someone who was part of that audience, I had seen the evolution of the Zoellas of the world, the KSIs of the world. I saw that they were like driving the purchasing decisions of young people. And actually before Fanbytes, I had like built and sold a very small business, and I realized the value of social media and Facebook pages and all of that. So the whole premise of Fanbytes was we're going to build software which helps brands to identify and connect with the fastest growing social media influencers online, right? So the pure idea was a software business. And for that, we were just, charging a couple of grand to use the software, etc. Until one day, a brand came to us and said, hey, we would like you to run an entire campaign for us. And I was like, oh, okay, here's the software. And they're like, no. We want you to do it. And then I was like, okay, we're now going to have to build a bit of like a services part of the business. And so by that time, that's when we're able to charge, 10, 20, 50 grand for a campaign. And then the government actually came to us and said, right, we want you to help promote something around the minimum wage. And I was like, okay, and we have 100 grand. Yeah. And at that point, it was now we need to think about doing the strategy behind it, the creative behind it, and the execution behind it. So by the time we sold the company, we were 75 people. And like the average campaign we're doing was in the 6-figure mark. So we went from, the first ever campaign that we ever did was for like 300 and then to 3 grand to 30 grand to 300 grand, all because we basically moved up the chain from just connecting brands and influencers to actually being a tech-enabled agency where we're strategizing, planning, executing, reporting on really large-scale influencer campaigns across the world.
And what do you think the future of the influencer economy looks like? Because particularly in my world, my original world of government, it feels like it doesn't have a great reputation, so on. It's interesting you mentioned the government using it a couple of times there.
Yeah.
But what do you think that, because a lot of people, a lot of youngsters now say they want to be part of the influencer economy, etc.
Yeah.
Where do you think the jobs of the future are in it?
Yeah. So I get asked this question a lot about if you were to start Fanbytes now, do you think it'd be successful? And I think that the answer is no, right? Because I think when we started it, people didn't understand how the influencer world worked. And even as part of our acquisition, a big rationale of the acquisition of Fanbytes was that influencer marketing will start off very independent, start off very siloed, similar to how radio started off silo, TV started off silo, and then at some point there will be consolidation, right? And so when Fanbytes got acquired, it was acquired by a broader media company, Brain Labs, who basically needed to have influence as part of their overall thing. So that first bit is to say that I don't think the opportunities in influencer marketing are anymore in connecting brands to influencers and that sort of thing. I think that market has become very congested if you're trying to do it independently. It has to be part of a much broader mix. Where the future, where the opportunities are, though, is if you like take an influencer at their core, they're just a media brand with a face on top of it, right?
Yeah.
Like they just have a curated audience who are curated by a specific interest, a specific passion, and there just happens to be almost like a human curator who you see, who is the YouTuber, TikToker, blah, blah. So if you take that to its most almost logical conclusion, therefore, then like if you want to see the future of influencers, you just see the future of what media brands are now, which is they build a bunch of direct to consumer propositions. They build a bunch of stuff around events, around exhibitions, around, e-com. That's where I see the future of influencers, which is very niche communities who are monetizing direct to consumer and who are building brands off the basis of their audience. And I think very important is the word niche, right? I think there is a guy, I think his name's Kevin Espirito or something. He founded a company called Epic Gardening, and he's just raised 11 million to basically build a gardening empire. And he just started off as a gardening YouTuber, right? Like that's quite niche, right? He is not someone a lot of people would know. He is not the KSI. He's not the Logan Paul, etc. But he's building a huge organization there. And I think he is almost a precursor to what like the future of influencers would basically be, which is like really niche communities, around a specific topic, and then just being able to sell those particular, audiences many things which help them feel part of a tribe, part of something bigger than themselves.
And how do you think Gen Z are different in that regard in terms of the makeup and the way they see the world? Because you become a flag waver for that generation now, and it's striking that it is probably one of the biggest differentiators in generations that we've seen between millennial and Gen Z. And I'd love you to kind of partly expand on what you were just saying about how do you think Generation Z are different?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think the first one is when you have a generation who have basically grown up with almost the phone as their mouthpiece and their form of TV, the world feels a lot smaller. And so as a consequence of that, when you think about ideas, the ideas don't feel like UK ideas or American ideas or, Chinese ideas. They're more like, I can just put out content here, or I can create this idea and anyone will see it because the, like social media algorithms would show them to the right people. And I think that kind of element of we think big directly from the start is something which is quite different from with the Gen Z audience compared to older audiences. There's almost this kind of weird, naivety of like, well, of course this thing is big because, well, I can access someone in Bangladesh right now. So they could see my content, or like they could see this idea. The other thing that I'd also say is, there's this, misnomer where people say, Gen Z care a lot about social issues and all that. And I kind of think that's crap. By the way, can I swear on this?
Yeah, totally.
So I think that's bullshit, right? Because I think prior generations have always cared about the same things. It just so happens that like it's far easier through the phone and through social media to amplify the things that Gen Z care about. So it's not like, well, they care more about the earth. Not really. Older generations also cared more about the earth. It's just like when they cared, they had rallies, which could be seen by maybe max 1,000 people. And now I put out a tweet or a TikTok and it's seen by 10 million people about what's going on in the world. And so people kind of like see that and then go, well, they care more. And it's not that they care more. You're just able to see it more, right? And so I think that's also quite a big distinction. And that can be used for like good or bad, right? Like or that can be seen favorably or negatively. Favorably because you're like, wow, there's so much power and influence. Negatively because there is so much power and influence. And so, you have people like, I don't know, people like Tate's just going crazy on social media. And some people are like, well, maybe it's a good thing because he is instilling, a sense of manliness and all that stuff. And then some other people are like, yes, but he's also a misogynistic prick, right? So you end up basically having both sides of the same coin, and it's neither good or bad. It's just that the things that we cared about have a perspective on are just more amplified.
Isn't there also a danger with social media? And I'd be interested more broadly in your thoughts on social media, having built an empire in your 20s, about how it does lead to that sort of Tate shock element, because that's the quickest way to sort of build followings, is to be shocking on it. Yeah. It's not just Gen Z on this, right? Politicians are equally guilty.
Oh, yeah. But I also don't think that's a social media thing. I think that's a people thing, right? Like, if you look at newspapers, they have the big board headline, like, shock, this person has been caught doing this, right? Mm-hmm. Or, like, do you want to quadruple your income in 4 days? And like, that's the headline in the newspaper, right? Yep. And so social media is just a medium. TV is just a medium. Radio is just a medium. I think social just makes it a lot more frequent, right? But, for a while, I studied a lot of, copywriting, and that was kind of something that I did pretty early on in Fanbytes to get better at sales and marketing. And some of the best copywriters is just like like shock, horror, awe, and you're like, oh my god. And that was in the 70s, and the medium was print, and now it just happens to be social.
No, that's a fair point. One of the phrases that you've used before, which kind of distinguishes Generation Z, which I think is fascinating, and a great phrase, is that the variable now is creativity.
Yeah.
So it used to be about kind of like capitalism used to be about how many widgets can you build for as cheaply as possible, how can you export them? And actually, your phrase, the variable now is creativity, really stuck with me.
Oh, there you go. That's a good phrase, isn't it?
Yeah, right? That is a difference in terms of, because there is now a generation of which you're part of who've been able to build kind of mass wealth in their 20s, right? And that wasn't the case, like, even at the turn of the century, right? That is a big change, and that's going to have quite a big impact on the economy as well, right? Because you've got another 50 years in the working world or whatever, right? You're not going to go sit on a beach, or not all the time anyway. And that's going to lead to sort of, you having impact in lots of different areas over that time. I mean, what you want to work with smart people, but what do you want your impact to be?
So when I first got into business, I would be, completely candid in saying my sole driver was financial. For those who don't know, I grew up on like the Oak Kent Road, 4th floor council estate. I was like, I need to get out of this, right? That was my sole function. There's a phrase that I love saying, which is like, change your world and then change the world, right? And so I'm a big fan of that. And so that was my sole drive. Now, I think my kind of force and function behind starting companies, I do think part of it is almost like social impact. I have been through the journey of building something and that transforming my life. And I think that business is the ultimate best vehicle for that. Like I cannot underestimate, whatever, how incredible it is to live in a time where through your ideas and through your skill, you can just transform the way that you live your life. And so I think a big part of it is like, how can I use my position? How can I use what I'm doing now? How can I use, even, before the podcast, we spoke about, the next company would be something insanely boring, right?
Yeah.
And it's because I think beforehand, when I cared a lot more about, what the thing was, I think I just care more now about like business as a vehicle for being able to spark some kind of like change somehow.
Yeah.
Right. And the way that you spark that change is, you know, by and large through monies. So I think, that's quite a big driving force in terms of like, okay, because I see kind of business and I guess generally life as a bit of a game, really. And like, you go through life and you win games and you get points and through winning some games, you get to understand different cheat codes, and the cheat codes level you up insanely, right?
Yeah.
And through those cheat codes, you're able to play a far bigger game. Like, I mean, okay, so we'll go there. Okay, so like, now I'm 28, right? Like, being a 28-year-old black guy who built a technology company, which then sold for tens of millions, means that the rooms and the access I have to are like way more than like I could even think about, which therefore means that I can say stuff and people take it serious. Or someone can come to me and say like, I want to affect this level of change. I want to do this thing. Can you help me with that? I go, yes, I can help you for do blah, 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 blah. That would not have happened if I didn't have the vehicle of business to have done it and been successful. So that's a long, convoluted way to basically say that I think like at the beginning, it was purely financial. And I still think there is an element of financial because like business success is a good game that I want to play. But I also think there is something to be said here for a byproduct of winning the game of business means that you're able to affect change in a way that you wouldn't have if all you did was just come through with, you know, good intentions. And I'm very excited by that.
And what have you noticed about those rooms that you now go into?
One is, I think, and the interesting thing about like these kind of rooms is like, it's not a race thing. I think it's more of kind of an awareness thing. Like, you almost go into rooms where, you know, I was saying yesterday I was hanging out with a bunch of VCs, right? You know, like a whole range of people from different backgrounds. And there is a way of like thinking about the world, which is completely different, which is less from, say, a scarcity mindset to a very like abundant mindset, which is, all right, we want to affect this thing. We want to do this thing. The question is never like, could we do it? It's more, okay, cool. How would we do it? Right. And that change from like could to how is quite an impactful thing. I think the other thing that I've come to realize is another question that's asked a lot is like, who do we need to do X, Y, Z? That's something that I learned in business, but I learned it quite late, which was, you know, most of the answers that you want are in the heads of other people. Just go find those other people. Right? Yeah. And it's just like, well, okay, cool. I would just almost spend my time being like a professional, like people collector. Because I know that rather than trying to find the answers myself, I can then go find the people who have the answers. I think just like those two are very good examples of how I've kind of learned by just growing up like further in the world and getting into certain rooms. The other thing actually, which I find fascinating, so I think in business, especially when you're early on, and to be honest, probably in like, well, anything, right? I think a lot of people operate from a zero-sum game. And the kind of higher you go in business or just in the world, you tend to realize the world is just not a zero-sum game. Mm-hmm. So when you are starting off, you go, well, for me to win, he has to lose, right? So you're very protective of the things that you have, or the things that you've acquired, etc. One of the things I came to realize as I got, you know, quote unquote, more successful, it's just this very kind of like openness to share, because the mentality is like, if I win, we all win, or by me helping you, the pie gets bigger. That was a big perspective shift for me. I would say like that's a huge perspective shift, because now, I'm very open around like my network or introductions, or, hey, here's this thing that I'm doing with my money, which helps me this way. And then someone else would tell me like, oh my God, yeah, that's pretty impressive. Da, da, da. Those three things have been things that I've learned recently, which I go, wow, that's insane.
Do you feel a responsibility to young people, but also young black men? Do you now feel a responsibility, a weight of that on your shoulders to help and to do so at scale, right?
So I thought this after I saw the company. I was like, oh, okay, cool. There's not many people who have been through this. How can I impact them? I don't see it as a responsibility. What I do see though is, because, often some people would go through this thing and then they'll set up like a charity, or like they do this and do that. I don't feel compelled to do that, because I think like the greatest game of giving is actually being quite a capitalist. It's like making money and then supporting people with that money. So like I've funded a bunch of companies, and yes, I do have a general, I will lean towards, oh, okay, this is a founder who I can empathize with. But I wouldn't say it's a responsibility. Like, I don't kind of see it as raison d'etre to be like, okay, yeah, cool. This is it. This is what I'm dedicating it to. I rather see it as I should continuously, especially, for the next company or anything that I do, I should continuously aim to be as successful as I possibly can, because that makes the byproduct in terms of people who see the journey, people who are inspired by it, people who can then come to me for money, people who can do all these things. It just makes it a lot bigger than not being successful.
Yeah. No, I can see that. But you've been generous. You've done lots of podcasts and so on. Like, you're clearly quite keen to kind of put your sort of message out there and how you did it, right?
Yeah, I think most of it is because, I started Fanbytes at 21. I really wish I basically had me when I was 21, and like, if you look at my podcast or just the way that I talk on podcasts, it's very frank and open. It's not PC. It's not like, hey, things were really great, etc. I'm like, well, no, this was shit. Don't do this. Yeah. Do this. This works. Don't do this. Don't do this. Because, I think, the 21-year-old me would absolutely have loved to be like, oh, well, this is how we overcame things and got our first customer. This is how we lost customers. This is why we lost customers. This is how we raise funding. This is how we approach funding. I'd love for that to have happened.
It is something that I'm struck by, the sort of slightly younger generation than me of business owners that are, because they've lived in a world where it's been online and they've had an online persona as well. I'm always struck with actually how honest people are. Well, I remember when Ben Francis was on the Today program the other day, and he was asked about whether they were going to float Gymshark and etc. And he just answered it like straightforwardly. And I just thought, that is not how media training would have been taught 10 years ago, right? And it was just like, yeah, well, we might do. It's something that's obviously tempting, but we're just kind of assessing our options. And I just thought like, there is something that has changed with this generation because they've had to live life so much in the public eye almost, that has made them a lot more honest with the way, because they've just had to have been.
Yeah. I mean, and also no one was really media trained, right?
Yeah.
So we started off just...
You're Insta trained, right?
Yeah. Like you're Insta trained. There you go, right? Like that's a good one. Insta trained and not media trained. That's good. And so for us, it's like, well, I'm just going to say stuff because I just talk on social like this with my friend. And then, it doesn't really matter the platform. Because actually the biggest danger is talking a certain way on social with your friends and then going on like traditional TV and then changing it and people going, you're a sellout.
Yeah.
That's actually a far bigger danger than being media trained.
Yeah.
Because then it's like, you sold out. Whereas if you just, whether it's radio, wherever, and you're like, no, I'm just going to, I did an event. I got this award probably like 2-3 years ago at the House of Lords. House of Commons, I don't know the difference. And
one's green, one's red.
Well, there you go. I don't know which one it is. and I came in like a black t-shirt and everyone was like wearing suits and stuff. And we took photos and videos, etc. And I think I posted it on LinkedIn or something like that. Hey, this was great, blah, blah. And like 90% of the comments were like, I love that you rocked up in a black t-shirt. Cause every photo I've seen you of is just chilling in a t-shirt. So actually it would have been a bit weird if you just went to his place and was like, well, now I'm playing their game. You know? And so, I think that runs true with most entrepreneurs.
But I think it's just on the dress code thing. Like, it's interesting because I care a lot about kind of people being successful from working class backgrounds. And there was something that I read once, which was like, in a way, when everyone had to wear a suit in the corporate world, that made life a lot easier because it was effectively like a uniform.
Right?
Whereas actually, like now, if you work at a production company, there's a sort of almost hidden dress code, like chinos and shirt. He says. But it's that's almost harder to sort of interpret and so on. And I do worry that, well, it's just an observation that it's just yet another thing. It's one of these, again, that sits at so much at the heart of the show and whatever, the paradox about, in a way, it's never been easier to make it, but also the amount of information that's out there makes it more harder than ever before to kind of navigate as well. Did you have a dress code at Fanbytes?
I'm trying to think. The last time I rocked a uniform was for my sixth form, but I went to like a boarding school thing, and we wore these. I went to a school called Christ Hospital, and we had these like 16th century gowns and whatever. And I do remember thinking like, what the heck is going on here? But
because you got on a scholarship to sixth form, right? Because that was a big moment as well.
Yeah. Going to CH was quite crazy. CH, Christ Hospital, right? Because I wanted to go there. I mean, sometimes I think about whether my life would have been different if I had not gone to CH. Because I also got scholarships to like Dulwich College, City of London, and Elaine's. And then I chose to go to Christ Hospital. And I think the sole reason why was because it was outside of London. It was in West Sussex. And it was a boarding school. And I felt like I almost needed to transport myself out of living in Southwark, Oaken Road to like experience a completely different world. And I don't know, would my life have been different? Maybe. But I think, and this is something I'm sure you've heard me say before, was like the single biggest thing that Christ Hospital helped me do was to understand that there was a world of wealth in between being poor and being Richard Branson. Like before I went there, I basically like didn't have a good sense of like what money was, because I just was like, well, you're either kind of like working class chilling, or you are Richard Branson. Like there is no gap in between. And then I said one day I was going home and there was like a helicopter came to pick up a kid from school, and I was just like, what the flip? Like, who is this person's dad? Right? And then I was like, oh, actually there's a whole world of people who like, they're not known, they're not like incredibly famous, they're not billionaires or whatever, but by building businesses, by doing great jobs. And like, that was when then I started the prior company to Fanbytes, Entrepreneur Express, etc. So like, that was definitely a pivotal moment for me. And I think, look, like that story in some different form, everyone's kind of had that kind of, if you were watching a film and then the film said, and at this point it all changed, like everyone has had that, whether it's in money or fitness or relationships or, blah, blah, blah. Like everyone's had that. And I think what Christ Hospital did was like gave me several of those moments in such a short space of time in 2 years that I was like, oh my God, now my life has changed, which is an interesting way to think about like, how do you get more young people or more people to strive for more? Well, just expose them to more of those sort of moments.
Yeah. No, it's a sliding doors moment. And I mean, that's a lot what we're trying to do with this podcast, right? Is just sort of create a careers platform where people can hear from inspirational people who've done different things and employed people, right?
Yeah.
Because it makes such a difference. What did your parents do?
My dad just worked for the council, and my mum was just on benefits. Like she just, I guess she like picked up some jobs, kind of like teaching people kind of like computer courses or something like that. But that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you're clearly sort of very driven. Where does that sort of, where has that drive kind of come from? Because one of the things that, where does that drive come from?
Where does my drive come from? Well, I mean, I can answer that question in two ways. The first one was an external drive and the other was an internal drive. The first one was I didn't like being poor. End of story. Like that was it, right? I woke up one day when I was like 16, 17 and I was like, actually more like 14, 15. I was like, oh my God, like I'm not able to afford stuff. And I don't know why I'm not able to afford stuff. I didn't choose to be here. Therefore, I'm going to change it. That was pretty much it, right? Very frank way. Then the internal, I think it was after the prior company, Entrepreneur Express. And like, for those, listen, that wasn't like some incredible exit. I was like 17, started this company, and then like basically 11 months afterwards sold it for 110 grand, right? And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe that I thought about this thing and I magicked it and like someone paid me for it. So, oh my God, this is insane. And then I think it became more of how good could you be, right? You almost have this skill / magic trick of being able to think about things, put them out into the world. People pay you for it, and like you love that sort of game. How good could you actually be? I think a lot more young people should take that perspective to life and work. As in, the perspective shouldn't be, what is my predetermined purpose? I think a lot of people kind of go, what's my purpose? How do I find my purpose? And I think that's bullshit. Like, I don't believe there is a purpose. I believe you define your purpose. And for me, I don't think I have a purpose. I think it's more, this thing is something I enjoy right now. And, I did a TED talk earlier, and I said, at some point I wanted to be a magician. At some point I wanted to be a journalist. At some point I wanted to be a like behavioral economist. And then at some point I was like, oh, actually the skill that I've been able to hone and I really enjoy is business. So I'm going to do that. We could be having this conversation in 10 years. And then I'm like, well, actually the business thing was kind of cool, but now I want to be like a marine biologist, right? So there isn't some kind of like predetermined purpose. You get to define it. And I think that is what has like driven me so far was, at the beginning it was financial, and then it then became more, you have this skill set. How good could you be at the skill set?
Yeah. But the interesting thing about all the careers that you kind of named there that you had an interest in along the way, like you end up using all of those skills and kind of building Fanbytes, right? Which I think is really interesting. You talk about selling the first company out for 110 grand. You obviously then sold Fanbytes for a lot more. You tweeted something the other day about like, it's never enough though.
Yeah.
And that really stuck with me because I think a lot of exited entrepreneurs find themselves in that boat, that it's like, there isn't a number that then suddenly makes it all the way. You think there is, but then you sort of go past it and, what are your kind of reflections on that?
So one of the things I would say is that when I say it's never enough, it's not so much it's never enough money or anything like that. I think it's more that the thing that you thought the money will fulfill is not the thing that it actually does, right? So a very good example is I was like, oh, well, actually, let me phrase it. So I think money has solved all my money problems. Right? Right? Like, everything, like, bills, parents, holidays, like everything taken care of. I don't need to think about it. But it hasn't solved, problems, say some of my, mental problems. So by that, I mean, there are still times where I feel anxious about certain things. There are still times that I think, a bit uncertain about certain actions. And whether I have 10 million or 100 million, I would still feel uncertain because that's a personality thing. One of the things that I have actually been very intentional of doing is I was hanging out with a friend who just sold his company for, for 400 million, like insane. And we're talking. And then he was like, okay, next one going to be $1 billion. It's like, why?
Yeah.
Like, why does it have to be $1 billion? He said, well, because this person saw it's coming for $1 billion. Okay. But you're both going to die at some point.
Yeah.
And then what happens? And he was like, yeah, but the game. I was like, all right, cool. But also, what game did you set out to play at the beginning? And I see the world in basically two ways. You're either playing the money game or the status game. And the problem is often exited entrepreneurs, they kind of finish the money game, then they go and play the status game. But the status game is just like a never ending hamster wheel because there's always going to be someone richer than you. There's always going to be someone better looking than you. There's always going to be someone like taller than you. Like there's always going to be someone who's, So you have to like set the bar and then say, I've passed this bar. And then every game I'm then playing is a game that I'm choosing to play, which is why even when I say it's like never enough, I don't mean it out of a position of like, woe is me is never enough. It's like, well, like I am choosing now to play a bigger game. And I know that it is not because I want to, keep up with the Joneses and stuff. It's like, well, I haven't maxed out my full potential yet, and like that is why it's never enough because, you sell a company for tens of millions and you go like, I wonder if I could, like do it again. Right.
Yeah.
And it's not to compare to some other person. It's like, I wonder if like me as an individual can fulfill the potential of being another person who can do it again. And I'm sure when I do that, you'd be like, no, I wonder if I could like just to fulfill my own potential, then could I do like 100 million? But the worst one is when people go, the other person has done it this way. Other person is doing it this way. I need to beat this person. Cause I'm just like, all right, cool. Then you will die. And then what happens?
But yeah, it's like different syndromes on the way. Because I've always been interested by the imposter syndrome, but then also the one you allude to there, like the lucky syndrome. Like, was I just look at it? Do you think success, status is different in the 21st century? It used to be about the house, the car, the watch. Now it's...
That's about your followers, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now it's about your followers and your likes.
It is a bit, right?
It is. I mean...
Are you listened to? Do people listen to you?
Yeah, exactly. Categorically, I mean, there's a whole world of where you can just buy fake followers for a reason, right? Yeah. Because people know like followers equals status and status apparently equals happiness. So that definitely has changed because now is less of a, what makes me feel successful. And now is like, what makes other people think I'm successful.
Yeah.
And that's all due to social media, to be honest. Like social media has amplified it so much. I've been in conversations with people and it's like, on Instagram, they have, 4 million followers. I mean, half of them are fake. They have like, rented this, rented that. And like, they've asked me for money. I'd be like, dude, but I thought you had the Lambo, bro.
Yeah.
I thought you had a big house and all of these things, but it's because the kind of currency now is, followers, likes, and all that.
Do you think that's going to change?
To what?
I don't know. Will there be an evolution of it in terms of there are only so many followers you can get, and will it become about sort of, deeper engagement with fans and that sort of side of things?
So there's this thing, it was a big trend about 2-3 months ago, which was like the de-influencing trend.
Yes.
Yeah. And like the de-influencer trend was basically a way to try, go back to our roots, like I'm not trying to influence you. Actually, I'm just being my like raw, authentic self and all that jazz. I do not believe that as long as there is social media, anyone can be like their raw, authentic self. Like, just no. Fundamentally, social media is like if someone put a camera on you 24/7, you wouldn't show them your worst bits, would you? Right? You just show them your best bits. So, do I think it would change? I don't know what it changed to. Right?
Yeah.
Like, well, status and success. There are some people, and more power to them, who can be the like silent rich person, like, or the quiet rich person. And there are people whose things that, but I think for most people, it's like success is only as good as other people seeing it, That's just the game that we're in, really. That's just the world that we live in.
One of the things that you've talked about is, if you could go back and give yourself some advice, would be to have like a lower intensity. Yeah. I was just so struck by that, because but it goes back to that, when you're in your 20s, you're in a hurry, like you're trying to build wealth, trying to build stuff, and I just thought I was just interested to kind of like unpack that more, because I think that's a very, it's easier to say once you've kind of built wealth and so on, but I was just struck by it.
Yeah, I know, it's one of those things, right? Like someone makes a bunch of money, then says money doesn't make you happy. It's like, all right, mate, you know? I mean, I was a very intense person. I still think that I am intense, not as intense as running Fanbytes. I was like super intense because I was like perpetually in a hurry. And I think that I had to almost, after a while, I was like, dude, like this doesn't, this decision, which this week you think is so crucial. If you project out 3 months, you're just going to be like, oh, well, okay. That perspective is something I do wish a lot more young people would have this, because I think that is a big, determinant of why there is such, a mental health, crisis right now, is because like people are perpetually in a hurry. And when they feel like they haven't done X by this time, they go, oh man, I flopped, Actually, this is quite funny. Today, I got a message from someone. They'll probably hear this podcast. But basically, this guy hit me up. I haven't ever met this person. He said, hey, I've got a bit of money now, and I'm deciding whether to buy a house or rent. I was like, first of all, I don't know why you're asking me, a random stranger online. But, I mean, that actually speaks to something completely different, which is this whole like halo effect that I think people put on people on social media, which is like, oh, I guess he or she has been successful in business, therefore they must know everything about life. It's like, no, right? But he was asking me that, and I said, all right, first of all, dude, all right, what do you want to do? And he said, all right, here are the pros and cons. This is this. And then one of the pros for buying a house was, he said, well, like my friends have a house. And also, generally in my 20s, I should have a house. It's like, wait, why? Why? Who? Where? What? Why? Like, based on what, right? And so, this kind of feeling of needing to be in a hurry and just check every possible box so that you can be like, okay, I did it. It's so silly. It's so silly. And I do think, it did drive me a lot during Fanbytes, because I was like, okay, by 30, I want to become like a multimillionaire. I don't want to ever have to work. And like, that was the thing that was driving me so much. And then I realized, man, if I just chilled out more, if I was just a bit more kind of relaxed about things, I think I'd have been a lot more enjoyable to work with.
Yeah.
And I would have also just been less stressed. Like, most things don't matter that much, you know?
Yeah, true. That I always invoke the Dr. Pepper strategy. What's the worst that could happen? But the not achieving thing though. Do you think? Because part of my worry with social media and so on is actually, people like you is but like you have
people like you.
It's people like you.
People like you piss me off.
but they see that 20-year-old in their 20s. They see how successful you've been and think, it's like I'm not getting anywhere, and I'm 26 and I'm 27 and I'm behind, and he's had a multi-million exit, and like I just don't know where I'm going in life. And that's a lot why we create this because it's hard to work this shit out, right?
But the crazy thing is, like, everybody feels like that.
Yeah,
like, everybody feels like that. You know, the person that you see as the successful entrepreneur is also like, oh man, the other person's more successful. That other person's got. I was with someone recently who said, oh yeah, I am more successful than that person, but they've got a hotter girlfriend. And I was like, wow, this is what we're doing now. Like, we've gone from it's about me to now how good looking is my partner.
Yeah.
And I was just like, okay, at some point is it, oh man, they've got better looking kids now. It's like, what, like, at what point is this going to end, right? So, I mean, it is a perpetual game. And I don't know, man. You just have to like set your bar and then see how it goes and, understand that it's a game.
Totally. I want to just get into one of the things about, because a lot of people listen to this about hiring podcasts.
Yeah.
One of those tweets, it was really interesting that I didn't really understand enough, right? So this is me picking your brain live on the podcast. But the tweet said, hire people to own functions, not get tasks done.
Yes.
In the early days, we hired salespeople. Over time, we hired people to run the sales team. In hindsight, we should have done it the other way around.
Yeah.
What do you sort of mean by that? So it's like basically getting heads of teams in rather than junior people?
Yeah, so when I started Fanbytes, I was very much, so two things. First of all, I had a very short-term attitude to things. So it was very much like, okay, who can we hire to do sales now? Who can we hire to do things now? And it was because I was thinking too much about like the tasks themselves rather than the organization, like how we building a company. I was just thinking, right, how do we do this now? How do we do this now? And when I talk about hiring people to run divisions and not functions, it is primarily because I realized that the single biggest thing as a founder, as a CEO, as anything, is like your mental effort to think through things and to solve problems. And when you hire people, say junior salespeople or salespeople to like do the actual work, you still have to do the cognitive work of like thinking through the problems, and then you just get people to do it. Whereas the best way to approach it is, right, I'm going to find the people who can also both do the cognitive stuff and also then can hire people who can do the tactical stuff, or they can do the cognitive and the tactical stuff. And that's where you get a 10x improvement on your business. And, for example, I was talking about, the next company that I do, and I don't know what the idea is going to be, but I do know that I'm spending a lot more time in terms of like, who am I going to start it with? Because I know that once we figure out the who, the what, first idea will probably not be the best one, etc. But we will stumble across something good. So it's just another example of how you almost, every answer that you want is in the heads of someone else. Go find those people, get them to like be part of the machine, and then the machine grows by 10x. Because hiring someone to do a division is not like a 2x improvement. It's not like a 3x improvement. It's like a 10x improvement. And so if you spend more time doing that rather than like, okay, we need this thing done right now at this very moment, it transforms your business.
And what do you think? What does interest you now? Because I imagine part of the problem that you have now is that you've got too many options in front of you.
Yeah, I'd say I've become a bit of a professional no sayer.
Yeah.
And that's been by design. All right. I don't want to be constantly saying yes and yes to everything. I think the overarching thing that interests me. So I generally have 3 principles. Number 1, is it with good, smart, high agent people? Mm-hmm. That phrase, high agency, is something that I've come to realize is really, really valuable to me. Just people who hold themselves to a high standard. There's actually a tweet I sent, which was, if you're running a business, you tend to over-index on people who are passionate about your business. But you actually need people who would just do a good job regardless of what business you put them in. And that was something that I learned later on in Fanbytes, when at the beginning I was shocking at hiring, because I'd hire people who were obsessed about influencer marketing. And it's actually, I should have hired people who just care about being good at the skill, at the marketing, or at the sales, at the client service, at finance. They love the thing, and you could put them in a bin collection business and they're like, oh my God, I love the actual skill of doing the thing.
Yeah.
So that's one continuous. Second one is, I am interested in things which are highly scalable, right? Fanbytes, great business. We got it to, multiple 8 figures in revenue. And it was, great business, but, it's still at its core was a tech-enabled agency, right? Now, it did well and all of that, but still the leverage there was a good bit of tech, a very healthy bit of tech, but still people, right? So I'm interested in quite software-driven businesses. And then the third criteria for me of things that are interesting, that are generally interesting, is I do prefer B2B companies by far than B2C companies. I've done now about 20 investments, and most of them are B2B companies. Maybe 15 B2B, 5 of them B2C. So that's been quite interesting.
There is a culture in the UK that doesn't talk about business and it doesn't talk about money. How do we improve that understanding across the board?
I think you have more people who are very open with having that conversation. And I do think that changes because you now have a newer generation of people who have done well. So actually, here's a very good example. 2 days ago, I was hanging out with this YouTuber. She's called Patricia Bright. Do you know?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Actually, yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Not always the case, but yeah.
Yeah. So she's cool. She's great. 4 million subs, or even people like Ali Abdaal, right?
Yeah.
Those two are very good examples of people who are what I call new money, right? People who have used new ways, new media, and build businesses, and in their 20s and early 30s have become successful, and they openly talk about it. So Patricia, everybody knows that I think she owns 15 properties. Ali has several videos where he says well, this is how much I made last year, and this is and so people know that stuff. And so I think there's kind of a generation of people now, Ali, Patricia, myself, even people like Ben Francis, right? Where you're oh, they're openly talking about money here. And so there is going to be a world, and I think, give it 2 years, where, it's fronted by people like us, etc., who are giving financial education and all of that to the masses in a way which was not there before, because of 2 things. Number 1, because in prior generations, the way people made money and became wealthy was almost you couldn't understand it. It was it's well, he started a timber business and then he sold it, right? And he's yeah, I'm not starting a timber business, right? Or he worked really hard for 10, 15 years, became an MD at an investment bank. And you're I just don't want to do that, right?
Yeah.
So the way people, or inherited, right? So you have a bunch of people where it's I just cannot relate to the way that you made your money. Now you have a whole generation of people, right? I made my money from doing like a social media business. So, all right, you understand social media, you can do it. People like Patricia and Ali and Ben, it's like, well, they made money from e-commerce and Shopify stores. I can also do that. I can do this from selling courses. So I think like, because now, I guess the path to wealth is a lot more accessible, I actually think that's going to change.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I think that the stuff about financial education is interesting, because I often think about it with careers. People say the problem is teachers aren't good careers advisors. And it's like, well, yeah, nor should they, nor can they be, or nor should they be, really, because that isn't what they've chosen to do. It is quite a specialised skill, actually. What do you think the impact of AI could be on the future of work?
On the future of work. Okay, so
on the future of jobs, etc. Yeah.
Well, jobs, work. So before I go into that, here's a very interesting thing. I actually posted it on LinkedIn today. This girl called Carolyn something. She basically was a Snapchat influencer, is a Snapchat influencer. And she made an AI bot, which was basically like her as a chatbot. And in a week, she made $72,000. And all she did was she sold it to her audience, and she charged $1 a minute. AI bot.
Yeah.
Like, the heck, right?
Yeah.
And that's insane. Anyway, that's a precursor to say two things. First of all, I think the impact of AI is it's going to enable just people in general to monetize online in ways that they just could not even think about, because suddenly you can train a data set, or you can train a data set, feed it into something like ChatGPT, and just like tap into really passionate, deep communities faster than you could ever do. Obviously, as we know, it makes things significantly faster and cheaper. And so, I think there's going to be a reskilling of jobs, not like, displacing. I think, reskilling. But for me, actually, the most exciting thing, and I think it's most relevant to me as well, is like, I actually see AI very much like social media. When social media first started off, I like really kicked off the MySpaces of the world and all of those people. And even, what tends to happen, right, is you have, social media as a thing. And then you have the platforms built on top of social media, Facebook, Google, blah, blah, blah. But then you have people building different variations of businesses on top of social media, right? So like Fanbytes was an agency. A good friend of mine ran Lad Bible, right? Like he capitalized on social media. Let's, look at Ben Francis. He capitalized on social media, right? So like you have three people. One did it an agency route, one did it a media brand route, one did an e-commerce route. And the reason I say that is because that's actually, to me, the biggest impact that like AI is going to have on jobs. It's like, if you imagine AI as social media, i.e. it's like the infrastructure layer. And then on top of it, Facebook, Google, blah, blah, that's like your Chat GPTs, your Midjourneys, your DALL-Es. There's going to be a bunch of different like businesses and careers built on top of all of those things. In the same way, Fanbytes, Lad Bible, Gymshark, Fashion Nova, all of these brands were built on top of it in different variations. And that's where I think it's like extremely exciting, because it's almost like if in 2005 you missed out on social media, even though you haven't like truly missed out, right? If in 2005 you missed out on when this thing was growing, you now have another opportunity with the benefit of hindsight. And I think that's so exciting, because I'm like, whoa, okay. Like, what is the corollary of what Fanbytes was but for AI? What is the corollary of Lad Bible but for AI? Like, there are so many different variations of businesses. And that is like so exciting to me that when I see people lament on social, oh my God, it's going to take our jobs. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like, there is a whole new world that's about to be birthed that you just need to like pick some lane. Not like the lane, just pick some lane, right? And as long as you're like playing in the game, you would win.
And that's one of the things that you said that was one of the differentiators about Fanbytes starting out, was like you were very specific about it in terms of being Gen Z marketing, which is so often is like the emphasis is like, how big is the market? Let's go after the biggest pie. All that, understandably, but actually, as you have said a number of times in this podcast, going after niche is a benefit on that. Who are some of the best creators that we might not have come across that are kind of on their way up? Like, I'm going to check out the gardening guy.
Yeah.
Who else is there?
I think, Kevin's good. I'm a big fan of, so I'm a football fan. I'm an Arsenal fan. And I'm a big fan of like Arsenal Fan TV. Don Robbie and those guys. I just feel as if like what they've pioneered is so insane, like fan channels, and they built a massive media empire off it. I think that's extremely exciting. I'm trying to think of niche ones. It's interesting. Do you know what? I've actually, I've been consuming a lot of TikTok stuff. And one of the things I've come to realize about creators in general now is that, especially when it's short form video, you don't tend to know the person's name, but you just know their format of content. So on TikTok, there's like this guy who, he rips leather bags or like luxury stuff and then tells you like, is this real or not? Right? Or like, is this genuine leather or is it not? I don't know his name, but every time I see his content, I just go, oh yeah, this is cool. Let me watch it. I think I'm leaning a lot into more of like podcast stuff. And for that, cause I also count them as, creators. So, you have like Don Robbie, you have kind of like the leather people. But podcasts, I'm a big fan of this, podcast called, Business Breakdowns. They just, I love those because I'm like, cool, this is insane. I'm a big fan of this podcast called, Founders Podcast. Yeah. So like he just kind of reads and, studies the biographies of people. So like, those are a few in there. But again, like if you go back to my kind of earlier framework, what's interesting is like all of these people, like the leather guy, I think he has an audience of like 3 million people. And his entire thing is, I'm a rip leather luxury things and tell you whether it's real or not. And I'm sure he can then build his own version of it, his own version of like truly luxury bags. Yeah. And he'd make a ton of money. And I just find that so incredible. So yeah, those are some creators who are cool.
If you were to pass the mic to another entrepreneur that we should get on the show that maybe hasn't had as much coverage yet, who would that be?
Oh, it would be, I know exactly who it'd be. It would be a guy called, Yao Asari. Yao runs a company called Ava Estelle. Ava Estelle is a skincare company. Now, full disclosure, I'm an investor, but, they've been going for 3 years. So it's a skincare brand, which is for people who suffer from pigmentation. And in this third year, they'll do 10 million. And Yao is a perfect example of how he, constantly hustles to try and find the right thing, but then is an incredible marketer. Like the way he thinks about angles on Facebook and how social media should work, etc., is absolutely brilliant. So if you do want him on the show, I'll happily make that intro, because I think he's also like just a very good example of how kind of you don't need a large team. I think Ava probably has, I want to say, 10 people max, and they're doing 10 million a year. And I'm like, it's just a good example of how you don't need a lot of people. You need to focus on a core problem and focus on just being good at a specific skill, and you can learn to be good at those skills. That's a big thing. One of my biggest frustrations is when people say, I'm not X sort of person. I just passionately hate that. Like, I'm not a salesperson. I'm not a marketing person. And like, do you think that we just like popped out of our mom's belly and we're like, oh yeah, now I know how to sell? It's like, come on, man. So I think Yao's such a good example of like almost constantly reinventing himself, and he'd be quite a good person to have.
Yeah. Well, we'd love that. And one of the things that you've said when I was researching is like, actually, getting bigger is not hiring more people necessarily.
Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting, we talk here as a team, like, there's lots of ways that we can use different tools that are coming out to kind of get more efficient the whole time. And it was something that really stuck with me. Timo, thanks so much for coming on Jimmy's Jobs of the Future. It's been brilliant to have you on, man.
No problem. It's just fun. It was good. Good question. Good research.
I think so. Yeah. No, pleasure.